Amalgamated Conspiracy wants to assure you that everything is going swimmingly.
Amalgamated Conspiracy, which we should remind you definitely does not exist and was not at all responsible for that recent fire in a government records department, would also like to say that all podcast hosting fees for the year have been paid.
What a weird thing to say.
Indeed. However, Amalgamated Conspiracy would like to add that if more people pitched in, we could definitely buy some better software for podcast recording when one of their members goes to Romania in a few weeks.
Josh, this isn't actually an Amalgamated Conspiracy message, is it?
No, but only because Amalgamated Conspiracy does not exist. And for no other reason. I'm going to stop you right there. Roll the theme.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Edison. He is M. Dentith. We are in Auckland, New Zealand.
But for how long, Joshua? For how long?
Forever in my case. Forever and ever.
Really? So you're never going to leave? You'll never leave!
God, I don't know. Probably not.
Well, I mean,
All my stuff's in
you are
order.
basically stuck here until such time your youngest child turns 18. You can boot them out
Well,
the door,
yes.
send them down
Off
the
to
coal mines,
university.
and have your second or third midlife crisis.
Good times, good times. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to this episode, I suppose. We're sitting here, might as well do it.
It is, I mean, the faster we get through it, the sooner we can go back to putting fans and things on for cooling ourselves down, because the heat in Auckland, just a little bit oppressive.
As we suggested last week, there has been another tropical cyclone which has kind of kicked the crap out of Tonga, so we shouldn't be complaining here, but we are complaining here because although our homes have not been destroyed, we do have horrible, humid, tropical air to contend with.
Yes, it is very, very hard being us. Very, very
so
hard.
So very hard. We kind of should do the news. It feels a little bit weird because, like, just this very afternoon, a bunch of stuff has been happening which hasn't really made it into the news. So we will not be talking about the most recent school shooting. We will not be talking about Jacob Zuma resigning and what's his name, Changarai. There's been a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh
going
yeah, I
on in
mean,
Africa,
political
which-
news basically today has been boom, 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 boom.
all over the place, and too soon for us to actually write up and get into the news that we're about to read out now.
And so by next week, it'll all be old hat, and you'll be going, you should have talked about that a week ago. But this is the problem with the podcast, going live at the last minute. Sometimes, some things are too live for us to cover. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking by it.
We need some sort of a crew that could handle that news, some sort of too live crew, if you will.
No.
No, okay.
No, I won't.
Fine.
In fact, to make sure you don't go any further with that, I'm going to say we go straight to the news right about now.
Fair enough.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
We turn now to local news and the saga of former tobacco lobbyist turned MP Chris Bishop, who got attacked in the media this week for sending messages to 13-year-old girls over Snapchat.
Well, that sounds dubious.
Indeed, it's certainly in the area of morally suspicious behaviour, even if nothing morally sinister has been alleged. Bishop was communicating with young girls over Snapchat before the election in what he claims was outrage, and when the girls' parents told him that was not on, he stopped.
Okay, so this isn't news so much as it's old?
Yes, which has led to a whole load of questions. Aside from Bishop's questionable judgment about messaging 13-year-olds, there's the question, why has this come up now?
Political commentators are torn between two hypotheses. Either it's evidence of dirty politics from the Labour Party, who are using it as a smokescreen to hide the announcement that they're shutting down charter schools, or it was a National Party hit job to knock Bishop out of the running, or to warn his friends not to run before Bill English stepped down as leader, which he finally did just a couple of days ago.
So, the former theory seems just a little too arch, despite National and its former support party ACT claiming that the closing of charter schools is an outrage. The public itself seems hardly invested in the idea at all. Sparing a political opponent to hide bad news is one thing, but using a smear to hide news no one cares about, that's another.
And the idea that it's a National Party hit job seems more likely, if only because once it became clear that Bill English's days were numbered, the factionalised nature of the National Party began to assert its various parts. Bishop's one of the younger, less conservative members of the party who's at least signalled recently that he'd vote progressively on issues like euthanasia and abortion. For Bill English's faction, former faction, however that works, this might be deemed a dangerous position, and so the smear might well be a signal for Bishop and his mates to stay out of the running.
The general lesson, though, is simple. Maybe the National Party should stop bringing ex-tobacco lobbyists into Parliament. This is the second former tobacco lobbyist to get into trouble for their misuse of communication technologies in the last year.
And yet there's more news of a local conspiratorial bent, I mean. Now, you might recall that in an older episode we talked about the 1080 conspiracy theory, the claim that the Department of Conservation in Aotearoa is covering up the fact that 1080 poison drops, used to control rampant mammalian predation of our local bird life, is actually killing our indigenous species.
Well, in what is not really a shock to anyone, the anti-1080 groups have been spreading around an image of what they claim is 100 Kiwis, the birds, not the local residents of Aotearoa, who were killed by 1080.
Except the image comes from the Department of Conservation, and instead shows a number of birds they collected from the Baybush region that had been killed by dogs and cats.
Yes, the ones alleging conspiracy here are the ones spreading disinformation. It's almost as if they have some kind of agenda.
Agenda?
Yes.
And now, Canada.
Canada's former
Freudian,
Minister
no?
of National Defence, Paul Hellyer, who led the Canadian Defence Force in the 1960s, has claimed that the Illuminati is real and holding back technology that has the ability to reverse the effects of climate change.
Hellyer appears to be the most senior, or one of the most senior people formerly part of a government to claim the Illuminati are real. He's long been a UFO buff, going on 50 years now, and has been vocal in demanding world governments admit to the alien technology that they're stockpiling.
He's also a standing member of the Privy Council of Canada.
So, what to make of Paul Hellyer's claims? On one hand, they seem a tad ridiculous, given what we know of the historical Bavarian Illuminati. On the other hand, though, he's a somewhat respectable member of the judiciary. Now, Em, you're our resident expert on conspiracy theories and expertise. What do we make of Mr. Hellyer and his eschatology?
Well, on one hand, Hellyer's combined belief in both a long-term giant political conspiracy, like the Illuminati and hidden UFO technology, seems hard to swallow, but there's no doubt he has the political connections. And even the Clintons were into their UFOs. But there's a startling lack of evidence. Hellyer has been making these claims for over a decade, and it's a lot of, I suspect that, and precious little, here's the proof. Frankly, it seems like he's a relic of the good old days of 1960s ufology, when the aliens were going to save us from nuclear annihilation, except now they're saving us from climate change.
And from aliens to secret bases. You might recall the furor over the Stratva heat map data release of a few weeks ago, where it turned out that by quizzing an API, certain Fitbit users' data could then be used to draw amusing heat maps of their walks.
Now, when the data was released, it turned out that military personnel, who weren't meant to use such devices in the first place, were being tracked. And so we got a startling insight into the wanderings around top secret bases like Australia's Pine Gap. But that's not all.
No, because now we're discovering secret underground bases, like the one in the Arctic. Tyler Glockner of YouTube channel Secure Team 10 uploaded video appearing to show heat signatures from an isolated location in Antarctica, which, according to Google Maps, is in an empty tract of land.
Spooky. And talking of spooky, I have no real link between this story and the next. Lee Basham, friend of the show and future donor to our coffers,
Hint, hint.
wrote to tell us of a conspiracy in a US school involving a pineapple.
Yes, girls playing the high five game in a Butler County school deliberately exposed a classmate to pineapple juice, knowing that she had a serious allergy to it. The girls were each charged with criminal conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and disorderly conduct.
It's a classic case of calling something what it is. The girls secretly plotted to expose another girl to pineapple juice in order to get a reaction. That is, they conspired to do so. So why are we so against conspiracy theories again, when this stuff happens all the time?
As a parent, I blame the parents, that's why.
And now, an update on Devin Nunes. Nunes, not nuns, or noons, as we said last week, repeatedly and unapologetically.
Yes, Mr. Nunes, the Devinator, the Devmeister General, DJ Devi Dev, Mr. Devilina, Mr. Dev Devilina.
Stop that!
has started his own alternative news outlet, the California Republican, which claims to deliver, quote, the best of US, California and Central Valley news, sports and analysis. Paid for by Nunes, the site is notable for featuring articles on why his memo is so important, and having a Twitter account which posted a photo of him with the label, "This is what a hero looks like."
Many people have joked that certain Republicans and Republican presidents are beginning to emulate the Russian mode of media control and glorification of party officials. But this really is getting scarily ridiculous.
And talking of ridiculous or scary, George Soros.
Yes, Soros is now fast becoming a boogie person in the UK, given his support of Remain causes. Various right-wing outlets, like the Daily Mail, have begun to cast Soros in the same light as Viktor Orban's Hungary, putting him forward as an evil meddler in with banking cartels, trying to destroy the UK.
Now, what Soros does is very public, given he runs foundations designed to give money publicly to causes he supports. So the conspiracy here has to be that he has some ulterior motive to the stated purpose of a free and liberal Europe. That motive? Underhandedness. Indeed, many of the smears of Soros in the British press read scarily like the anti-Semitism of the early 20th century, with Soros, a Hungarian Jew, being a typical, it's in air quotes for the podcast listeners, calculating Jew causing trouble for innocent Christians everywhere. So, what's been the response from Soros to all of this?
He's decided to donate even more money to the Remain cause. That's what.
And finally, a JFK update. Quincy Jones would like us all to know he knows who the people were who really killed JFK.
In a wide-ranging interview with Vulture, Jones, an incredibly famous music producer, poured scorn on the ability of the Beatles, revealed that Marlon Brando had sex with Richard Pryor, and said that there was a definite link between Chicago mobster Sam Giancana, Frank Sinatra, and the death of JFK.
Indeed, so amazing were his various revelations, like pouring scorn on Cyndi Lauper, that the JFK thing just seemed like an amusing aside. I mean, when he talks about his 22 current girlfriends and how Michael Jackson stole musical hooks left, right and centre, JFK revelations seem just a little tame.
And with that lack of a bombshell, let's move on to matters historical.
Let's.
Start.
Okay, you're doing the pouring a drink thing.
I am, yes. Just don't move too much whilst I do this, otherwise, could be whiskey everywhere. And then your wife will say, "Have you been drinking, Josh?" And you'll go, yes, I have.
Yes, I have. I loved it. Oh, so we're back. We're back with the main topic of today's episode, which is false histories, alternative histories.
Pseudo-histories.
Pseudo-histories. We've touched on this a little bit in the past. We've talked about the local sort of pseudo-histories here with the Celtic New Zealand hypothesis, and there are equivalents of that in various places around the world.
Oh, I mean, there are huge numbers of people. Well, I say huge numbers. There's a significant number of people in the US who believe that the Templars, for example, got to North America before the Spanish and integrated with Native American society, and are responsible for all sorts of things going on there. There are people who claim that the Mycenaean Greeks made it all the way to North America to steal all of their bronze, because they didn't have enough bronze in Europe, apparently.
No.
And taking bronze all the way back to the Mediterranean by ship would be actually quite a hardship. And how would they even know there was bronze there in the first place? Let alone, how do they know it was there to find in the first place? Very confusing. But there are all sorts of interesting historical theses out there which claim that the history of the world as we know it now is not the history of the world as it unfolded. And we're going to look at a few choice examples from the archives today.
Yes. So I mean, when it comes to things like the Celtic New Zealand and other ones like that, you usually don't have to scratch the surface particularly hard to see good old-fashioned racism behind a lot of it.
No, a lot of the New Zealand pseudo-historical theories basically are Maoris. How dare they exist? Why can't they just be white like us? Oh, let's try and rewrite history so that they are in fact like us. Or they're the ones who stole our land, really.
Yes, a lot of it. It's either white people were actually here first after all, or white people were really responsible for the things that other civilizations did, because we couldn't possibly imagine that anyone non-white could make a civilization.
Despite the fact that our entire history is actually based around our white history is entirely based around stealing things from other cultures all the time, and for a very significant amount of time, being very proud of that fact.
But anyway, so that's where we've touched on that in the past, so we don't need to. One thing maybe we could mention up top that we've also talked about before is the Mandela effect stuff, where people claim that.
So you're remembering Nelson Mandela, who comes from the world where you were born before time was changed.
Yes.
To Mandela.
Indeed. I mean, the Mandela effect itself refers to, what was it, people's memories of Mandela being in prison when he wasn't, or not being in prison when he was? Dying in prison, that's right. When in fact he was released and died.
And I mean, there's a similar thesis about Saddam Hussein. Many people say, but I remember reading in the papers or hearing on the news that Saddam Hussein was already dead, or Osama bin Laden. Many famous people appear to have died well beforehand. Mark Twain famously died before he actually died.
That was shoddy reporting. And then there's the wacky ones that we've talked about in the past, the people who insist it was Berenstain Bears, not Berenstain Bears, despite all the evidence.
And you, with your belief that C-3PO always had golden legs.
With his silver legs.
It was silver, Josh. I don't care what you said last week, it was silver.
I agree, it was silver.
You do now.
I do.
You do, you agree now.
I do, and I always have. Are
Are
you rewriting history, Matthew?
No,
You're one of them! God damn it.
This is where I rip my mask off and reveal that I am, in fact, still myself. But we're getting off. Actually, let's do the Mandela stuff now. Yes, I think rather than go back to it.
Do the wacky ones first, and we can do the substantive ones after. When it comes to... Now, of course... When people say, here's this thing, I'm sure I remember this thing happening. I'm sure I remember there was a movie called Shazam starring Sinbad, and people will say, no, you're thinking of a movie called Kazam starring Shaquille O'Neal. People say, but no, obviously something's changed. Why would they do that? Well, there must be some sort of weird conspiracy. But where we can say sort of, racism for the various cultural ones, with this one, kind of hard to come up with any sort of an actual motive for a conspiracy there. Why make people think it really was Berenstain Bears? Why go to all the trouble of doctoring every book, photograph, historical bit of information?
So the most plausible hypothesis here is that, let's say there's some government department or some world government which is trying to rewrite history in such a way to give them an advantage all the time. And this rewriting of history works in a way where there are little pockets of information which escape the rewrite. So you're finding this evidence of, but when I grew up it was Berenstain Bears, and now it's Berenstain. So some small change happened, and that meant that there was a small change in the writing of this particular book. But I remember how things were, and that's evidence someone's fiddling with the time stream. So the purpose is not to make people believe in films that never happened. The purpose is you find evidence of things which have changed to provide support for the claim that there is something else going on. The conspiracy is not, let's change the name of books. The conspiracy is, let's achieve something else, but this is the evidence that the time stream is being fiddled with.
Right, okay. I've also seen people claim it's evidence that we're living in some sort of Matrix-style simulated reality.
The Elon Musk hypothesis.
There's a few of them going around. I mean, it's one of those weird sort of arguments that sort of starts with nothing and then proves things with statistics out of it. Or certainly the argument that we're living in a simulated reality by saying that it's certainly in principle within our reality, although we can't do it yet, it's possible in principle to create a virtual reality environment that would be indistinguishable from real reality. And it would then be possible eventually within that simulated reality to create a virtual reality within that reality, like the movie, was it The 13th Floor back in the 90s? Yes. That sort of scenario. So once we allow the fact that it's possible that there could be numerous, potentially infinite simulated realities nested within one another, that means you have a potentially infinite number of realities, only one of which is the actual real reality, so therefore statistically the chances that we're in the real one are practically zero.
Now at this point in time, eagle-eyed listeners, I have no idea how that works.
Who has good ears? Bat-eared listeners?
Bat-eared listeners will be going, but wasn't there a report in Scientific American or some other scientific periodical recently saying that scientists have disproved the simulation hypothesis by saying there aren't enough atoms in our universe to be able to simulate our universe? At which point I'll go, that was actually a bit of shoddy scientific hypothesizing, because the scientists who wrote that particular piece were claiming you can't run a simulation of our universe in our universe given physical constraints. But of course, that's not the claim. The claim is that the simulation of our universe is occurring in another universe, of which the simulation is a subset of that greater universe. So they didn't actually prove we can't be in a simulation. They simply proved that in a single universe state, you can't simulate your universe inside your universe, which we kind of already knew. The fact that we might be in a simulation is still a live option at this particular point in time. And Elon Musk, who will save us all with his jetpacks, his robocars, and his battery packs, zombie hordes.
Things.
Yeah. He may well be right, even if he is ever so slightly odd.
He is a little bit odd. But it all comes down to, when you look at it, what's the actual evidence for a lot of these things? It's people saying, I remember it differently. And while we like to think our memories
I mean, Josh
are
used to
precise
believe
and
that C-3PO
infallible,
had golden legs.
I will murder you in your sleep. Anyway, we like to think memories are precise and infallible, and that we've got these things stored away and we just recall them when we want to. We know that that's not how memories
we
work.
know that memories are fallible. In fact, we know from tests that psychologists have devised that memories are pretty fragile within moments of the memory being formed. It's not surprising that many people share, and I'm going to put in air quotes the word delusion here, that the Berenstain Bears were the Berenstain Bears.
Because that's a much more common form of... We used to Frankenstein, Einstein. We just make the assumption that that's how names
people
go.
who watch late night movies on TV who might be slightly stoned or slightly drunk may well remember one African American being played by another and there's your racism.
Exactly. Although Sinbad did apparently once appear as a genie on a completely different show, which is another...
Well, that just means the question is still live.
One thing I haven't, just thinking off the top of my head, if I wanted to come up for a reason behind that, I'd claim it was the government doing some sort of MK Ultra sort of reality, seeing how if they can get people to believe things.
Don't actually
and
have
they're
to have
doing it
time
because
travel.
they're starting small. You see, they're starting with something little, so that they can, and if that works, then they'll go and completely rewrite reality.
Who was the author who wrote I think it was a short story, was it a novel, The President of the United States one day removes a word from the dictionary.
And
And then
yes.
no one knows what
Yes,
that word
I've read
was.
It because of Contact with Aliens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
David Brin?
Maybe.
Yes.
I'm actually fairly sure you told me about this story.
I probably did. Your cousin got me to read it.
Well, my cousin got people to read a lot of things.
sure
You
did.
can't hold me responsible
Pretty sure it was
for my
David
cousins.
Brin's Otherness, just a collection of short stories.
Yeah, but it's
Look
the
it up.
idea that you do this thing and then people go, but why? Because, well, not going to find
Must
out.
never know.
But let's move on
Yes,
to
let's do
sort of move
something
on to
that's got a little
matters
bit more meat
ahistorical.
behind
Let's talk about the Phantom Menace. Sorry, Phantom Time.
No, what about The Phantom Thread, starring Daniel Day-Lewis and someone else I can't remember?
I've
Out
never
in
seen
theatres
it,
now.
so I can't actually make
No,
any
no,
comment
no,
on
no.
it. Let's talk about Phantom Time.
Let's do that. Yep.
So, Phantom Time is a thesis that was published by this guy called Herbert Illig. It was published in 1991, and it's the hypothesis that there existed a conspiracy by Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII to fabricate the Anno Domini dating system retrospectively to legitimize Otto's claim to the Holy Roman Empire.
So they're saying they fiddled the numbers then?
Yeah, basically they got rid of almost 3 centuries of history to basically shortcut, this person existed, all those people existed, and I'm the descendant, and that's why I have claim to the Holy Roman Empire. And those other people, they definitely existed, and they lived for about 300 years, and you're all just wrong.
So this is a case where they inserted time into history? Is that what they're saying?
No, they
chopped it out.
Oh, sorry, yeah. No, the conspirators
conspiracy,
added
yes.
300 years to history.
Right.
To give this person a lineage to then claim, and I'm related to X, and X is a Holy Roman Emperor. That makes me one too.
Right. What evidence does he present for this?
So, the
Substantial
evidence
fact.
apparently is a scarcity of archaeological evidence that can be reliably dated to the particular period. This is between 614 and 911. The presence of Romanesque architecture in 10th century Western Europe, suggesting the Roman era was not as long ago as people like to think. And the fact that when the Gregorian calendar was introduced to update the inadequacies of the Julian calendar, which was losing days.
Mm-hmm.
If they were going with the Julian calendar back in when it was introduced in BC 45, then they should have added 13 days to the calendar, but they only added 10. And by those 3 days essentially end up being 3 centuries worth of time. So, Pope Gregory knew what was going on. Ipso facto, so should we.
Were these people the ones who did the change to the Gregorian calendar, or is he saying they just took advantage of the fact that that had happened?
Well, no, so these are people who are going, we can't admit that there's 300 years which doesn't actually exist. We'll just fiddle around with these things. It'll be fine.
Now, of course, the problem with these theories is that there's more to history than, say, Roman or European history.
Well, like I say, there's more to history than architecture and written records.
Exactly, yes. There's, for instance, astronomical, cosmological records. We know about comets and eclipses and so on. We know that they happen on regular schedules. We can work backwards and know, we know Halley's Comet was last here in the 80s. We know it showed up in 1066 because it's on the Bayeux Tapestry, that sort of stuff. So we can look at things like eclipses, which we can work out, by calculating backwards. We can know, right, this would have happened X many hundred years ago, and can then compare that to records of the time.
Yes, and a major issue is solar eclipses. So we know how solar eclipses work, but the physics of that has actually been down pat for quite some time. And so we can say, but there were solar eclipses during the supposedly made-up 300 years, which you can't then just backport to earlier points in history, because those earlier points in history, we have reports of those solar eclipses and things that are going to occur afterwards. So the kind of physics of the world kind of goes against phantom time. And then you have other issues. So Illig was right that if you take the updating of the calendar by Pope Gregory and say you have to be dating back to the introduction of the Julian calendar in 45 BC, then the number of days added should be different, except that Pope Gregory wasn't concerned about the introduction of the Julian calendar. He was concerned with one of the early church councils, which occurred in the 3rd century. And so the number of days he added was appropriate to that latter date, and not the earlier date that Illig is so interested in.
You've lost me completely.
So basically, the reason why Gregory added X number of days rather than Y, because he wasn't working with with BC 45. He was working with around about 297 AD.
No, lost. Gone.
I'm sure
Numbers.
the listeners, the listeners will understand. If they don't, I'm sure they'll write in to go, no, Josh was right. They never write in to say Josh is right, so I'm just assuming they'll just go, no, you're just a moron.
Yep, no, that's fair. Of course, the other problem is that history does not just occur in the Holy Roman Empire.
That's a scandalous thing to say, and you take that back.
I never will. Because while things were during this missing period of time, we don't just have history in Europe, in the Roman Empire, which to claim that is fabricated. There's a whole bunch of history in, say, the Middle East, in Asia, China. China was doing quite
Mesoamerica,
ticking along quite happily, yeah. So unless you want to claim that all of that is somehow fake as well, historical records that the Roman civilization wouldn't even have known about in some cases, and certainly wouldn't have had control over, the whole thing starts to look a lot more shaky.
Yes, and the thing is, many of these civilizations had contact, sometimes limited, sometimes actually quite extensive, with other civilizations.
So you
So
can
the
cross-reference.
Yes, so the fact that if certain European leaders are going to add in 300 years to legitimize a claim, they then have to persuade the leaders of other cultures, oh, by the way, you need to invent some time to make our records match, because otherwise there's going to be a huge discrepancy. And it's very hard to see how a Chinese emperor is going to go, yes, I will add in 300 years to my civilization's
Yes, you asked
history.
nicely, why not?
Because, of course, that makes complete sense.
Yes, so the whole thing really starts to look a bit more shaky. So hit me with another one then.
All right, let's do with the new chronology.
Sounds fancy.
Yes, it's by Fomenko. Fomenko for men. It sounds exquisite.
It does a little bit.
Yeah, it
actually.
does
To say
actually.
it is quite...
Flamenco for men.
Russian.
Exquisite.
Russian, was it?
Indeed.
Yes.
And long story short, it is going to be a Russian nationalistic thesis. So the new chronology, which sounds like a Beck album, argues that the conventional chronology of Middle Eastern and European history is fundamentally flawed, and that events attributed to the civilizations of the Roman Empire, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt actually occurred during the Middle Ages more than 1,000 years later. So
once again, we're chopping stuff out of history.
chopping 1,000 years out of history.
Oh, there we go. This guy's doing it properly. Last one is just chopping out a few centuries.
And so, so this basically comes down to the work of a Russian mathematician by the name of Anatoly Fomenko, although actually the work kind of predates him, but it goes back to this person called Nikolai Muzorov. And according to Fomenko's claim, the written history of humankind only goes far back as AD 800, and there's virtually no information about events between AD 800 and 1000, and most known historical events actually took place between AD 1000 and AD 1500.
All right, and so he starts to get a little bit more Baroque, perhaps, in his theories, where he starts claiming that lots of things that we talk about as happening, 2,000 years ago are actually sort of reflections, misunderstandings, reinterpretations of things that were actually much, much more recent.
Yeah, so his claim is that many historical figures we talk about, particularly ancient Greek philosophers, are actually reflections of more contemporary figures, where the stories have been told and reflected back through time. So essentially you take a historical character and you then tell an even earlier version of their story to fill in the gaps.
So what would be his motivation behind coming up with something like this?
So central to Fomenko's new chronology is the claim of the existence of a vast Slav-Turk empire, which he called the Russian Horde, which apparently played the dominant role in Eurasian history before the 17th century, but has basically been ignored by modern-day Russia because of the interference of the Germans.
Right.
It's Russian nationalism, basically. The history of the world actually owes itself to the Russian Horde, but that history has been suppressed by other European powers to make Russia not realize how glorious and magnificent it actually is.
Right, so it's kind of a bigger scale version of the Celtic New Zealand type stuff, is it? It's more nationalist than racist, but still trying to say that the contributions and achievements of various civilizations are actually down to my crowd.
Yeah,
not those dirty foreigners.
And actually, I saw a variation of this in Romania. So Romania has this thesis believed by some people that the ancient Dacians, their foundational tribe, actually was the most technologically powerful and literate society on the earth, and they are responsible for the invention of everything we know, from the propeller pencil to the jet engine, although actually the Romanians actually did invent the jet engine, and it's other polities around them like Bulgaria and Hungary who've been keeping Romania down by trying to deny their actual history. So yes, this is a common belief that many cultures have, that we are the best, and because we're the best, we must also have invented everything, which is important.
Reminds me, did you ever see My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
No,
Not My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but the movie.
I remember your wedding, because
Which is
he
neither
wasn't.
big nor fat nor Greek nor an actual wedding. It
Yeah,
was a civil
but I
union.
have not seen the film.
Quite interesting, totally aside, quite interesting as a romantic comedy, in that it's about the only romantic comedy I've ever seen that doesn't follow the cast iron template for all romantic comedies, where they sort of get together in a cute situation, get along nicely, then there's some big wacky misunderstanding, they fall apart, they get back together at the end. This one's just about a couple who fall in love, decide to get married, and her Greek family's a little bit wacky, but everyone has a good time and gets along. But the point is that her father, I think there's a running joke where he claims that all languages are related to ancient Greek, and that therefore any time he encounters a foreign word, he sort of invents an etymology for it, showing how it's actually related to this old Greek word.
Fair enough.
Really?
He sounds like a good old-fashioned racist.
Yes, it's a funny joke. Now, so in terms of evidence and all of that malarkey, he claims there's this big sort of lack of historical evidence and documentation. Is that true or not so much true?
Well, in the same respect, it's not. It's the fact that there may be a lack of European documentation for certain points in time, but we have other cultures we can refer to which people had in contact. His other bit of evidence is statistics. So he's a mathematician. He's claiming he's found a statistical anomaly in history, which shows how these reflected phantom characters basically reoccur through history. So he goes, well, look, we compare X with Y, and if X and Y share the same characteristics, they must be the same person. Ipso facto, if these two people share the same characteristics in story, the earlier version is a historical reflection of the latter. So the more recent character is real, and earlier stories of a similar character are either misinterpreted stories of that character or deliberate inventions to make history look longer. But many mathematicians who have looked at his work is going, this seems like some of the most cherry-picked data of all time. He spends his entire time trying to find similarities and ignoring dissimilarities, and thus is astounded by how many similarities he finds, because he's ignoring the garbage pile of dissimilarities he's discarded to get to those remarkable correspondences.
And yes, basically all of the criticisms that you could make for the phantom time theory pretty much apply to this one as well. There are things that are outside of Earth's history entirely, cosmological events, and there are histories going on in other parts of the world that aren't just Eurasia, that you have to contend with as well. So yeah, these things, if you're going to come up with an alternate history, it's kind of got to explain all of history, not just the bit of it that you're interested in.
Except that that's the point. People who are putting forward hypotheses like this don't have to explain other world histories, because their target isn't people from other cultures. Their target are the nationalists within their own culture. So all you need to do is show to the nationalists that your history has been underplayed. And of course, anyone who goes, but hold on, what about China? You would bring up China, wouldn't you? You, Russia...
If you like China so much, why don't you move to China?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. The argument is, of course you're going to bring up another culture to downplay what Russia has done. Isn't that the most treasonous thing you can possibly imagine? It's just like Democrats not applauding Donald Trump. It's treason.
Yes, no, that's true. I suppose when I say you need to account for these things, you don't need to for the purposes that these conspiracy theories are being put forward for. You need to satisfy pedantic assholes like us.
Yeah.
But,
and we're actually not the target audience for these theories.
Strangely enough, we are not.
No, people are not trying to persuade me that the ancient Celts got to Aotearoa first, because people know that I know enough of the archaeology to be able to go, that's not true. They simply have to persuade people who are already predisposed to think that Maori are bad. And that's all they've got to do.
Exactly. Right, well, I think we're done with our little jaunt through alternate history. Any final words?
Yes.
That's not a bad final word as far as they go. Well, in that case, we should probably round things out by saying you have been listening to / watching the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Addison. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me on Twitter, where my username is monkeyfluids. I notice whenever people on other podcasts mention Twitter handles, they always say I'm at monkeyfluids, as though people don't know.
But also,
Like,
if you go to twitter.com and you type in a handle, you don't put the @
no,
in
it's only
anywhere.
if you're mentioning someone. I
Yeah.
don't know. So mentally add the @ if it makes you happy, but my username is monkeyfluids. Now here we have the good Dr. M. Dentith. How would one get in touch with you?
So you can find me on Conspiracism, that's also at Twitter, that's at Conspiracism if you're on a different podcast. And you'll also find that our Facebook page has suddenly become very active because I found a way to link my tweets and retweets on the Conspiracism account to go directly to Facebook without my needing to touch a single
Fiendishly
button.
clever.
So you can also find us at the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy on Facebook, where you can, if you don't use Twitter, you can get all the same updates you would get from my Twitter feed. It's a remarkable bit of technological synchronicity and fusion cuisine.
Truly, we live in an age of wonders. Now, what else? Oh, your website, of course, is episto.org.
It is indeed where you'll find copies of this podcast, the one you're listening to right now. Although there is going to be some information about a forthcoming paper.
Ooh la la.
I know.
This podcast is available in audio format on iTunes, on Stitcher, not on Spotify, as we were asked recently. Apparently you have to be invited.
Yeah, Spotify curates its
Right.
podcast, so there has to be demand for a podcast to be on Spotify. So if you want to email the people at Spotify and say, hey, why don't you add those froopy dudes who do the Podcaster's Guide to Conspiracy to your feed, we will say, yes, please, and also, kashing. Not because I think we'll get any money from
No.
it, because we just like saying, kashing.
It's a nice sound. Yes, so iTunes, Stitcher, a few other places. Podbean.com is the height. The height?
The height.
The
It
height.
is the height.
The
It
site
is the
where
height.
we're hosted, not the height where we're soasted, which is not a real word. Stop
Well,
saying.
it actually could be if I had another glass of whiskey.
Yes, well, get onto it. Podbean.com is the site where we are hosted. If you go to conspiracism.podbean.com, you'll find the original source materials of this podcast, as well as links to our various patronage campaigns, which, as was intimated at the start of this podcast, have managed to cover our hosting costs, for which
Indeed.
we are greatly grateful.
But we are actually quite keen to improve some of our software, our AutoCue software, which admittedly we won't be using for particularly long, because when I go back to Romania, the AutoCue will not be so important, but on my return from Romania, it will be, actually does require a license fee. Or at least we need some money to be able to explore options for AutoCue software. And we would like some money to be able to buy Skype Professional so that we can do a better version of the podcast whilst I'm away, rather than the kind of kludge we've been working with the last
yes.
few months. When I
Which
was
worked
in
okay,
Romania.
but was a little fiddlier than it needed to.
Basically, the issue is I can't see what's going on and Josh can, and that makes it quite confounding to actually have a face-to-face discussion.
Yes. So, the moral of the story is, give us money, please.
Yes, lots of it. So,
And for those of you who've been giving us money, thank you very much. 'Cause
Indeed.
It's been
you don't need to do anything
Yep.
more. You're already doing the non-existent God's work. But those of you who are listening for free, even if so, you just give us a few coins. That would be grand.
And I believe that is everything.
That
We've done
is
contacts,
everything.
We've done addresses, we've done patronage campaigns. So, I guess all that remains is for me to say goodbye, and for M to say...
Sausages.
Not
Sausages.
Not your best work.
No, actually,
No.
I really should be prepared for this every week, and all I could think of was sausages. I can't even really eat sausages because I'm vegan.
There are vegan sausages, surely.
Yeah, but they're horrible.
Oh.
Actually, no, that's not true. There are some decent vegan sausages out there. You don't need to know about vegan
No.
sausages. You just need us to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to a podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, hosted by Josh Addison and M. Dentith. If you'd like to help support us, please find details of our pledge drive at either Patreon or Podbean. If you'd like to get in contact with us, email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.